So today's discussion is about motive versus intent. Which was important and how do we look for them? What does it all mean? People keep asking, what's the motive? Why would he shoot? Why would anyone shoot in a situation like this? But let's be very clear. Motive is detective novel, true crime, murder mystery, movie type of information. Motive you never need to prove in a court of law. It is never an issue as far as an element of a case. Motive is not important for trial. Now, it's a nice to have. It's nice to say why people do something. But does a prosecutor or a police officer, detective ever need to prove motive? No. Unless they're in the last final scene of some sort of detective novel or whodunit movie. You have to prove for court is something called intent. Intent is what you were thinking or what you were doing at the point the event happened. Why did you do the event? What were you thinking? Not what was your motivation to do the event, but were you trying to do the event on purpose, by accident? Was it something you should have thought better about? That's what intent is. So let's talk about the different levels of intent and how that affects trials in different cases and how they prove it in court, because how do you prove someone's state of mind? It's something very hard to do. The law is very specific about how you're allowed to do that. So historically, there's many different ways to categorize intent. There's many different kinds. But for the purpose of this video and the way I think about it when we actually try these cases, we mainly think of 5 intents. These are mainly for the Model Penal Code. I'm going to go over all 5 intents with you and then say what each one of those intents are and how they relate to different cases you may have to deal with in the future. So unlike most elements of a charge, you can't look inside someone's mind. You can't see what their intent is. You have to interpret intent from their physical actions. There has to be you can't speculate. Remember, you have to figure out something from what they do. So usually jury instructions are very, very clear. You can determine someone's intent based on the actions they took or words they used. Your reason and common sense. What would you think the person was thinking at the time they took it? Why did they do what they did? I'm going to explain from the hardest state of mind to the easiest state of mind to prove. That's just the standard way to go look at it. So let's look at it that way. The hardest is specific intent. Now, courts and laws now look down on this because it's so hard to prove. For example, in the state of Hawaii, what specific intent is that you intended a very specific result to your actions. So, for example, in the state of Hawaii, we have a law called harassment. To be found guilty of harassment, you have to intend to harass, annoy, or alarm someone. So what that means is, if you meant to hurt them without harassing them, if you meant to insult them without harassing, annoying, or alarming them, you cannot be found guilty of harassment. Also, you never need to intend to commit a crime. You only need to intend the action. Like if you think the action is something that's legal or otherwise, but you intended to do it, and that action is a crime, then you're guilty. That's a problem. So below specific intent, what we have is willful or purposeful intent. Now, when we talk about willful or purposeful intent, what we're talking about is your conscious object to achieve whatever the action is. So often, did you purposely fire a gun, for example? Well, then you had to want to fire the gun. It's not accidental. It's not a mistake. So let's talk about knowing intent. Knowing is when you're aware that whatever you do, what's going to happen is a natural result of whatever the conduct is that you made. Your natural result, that you're aware of this natural result, then it's knowing intent. Reckless intent, and this is a super common one. Reckless intent is when you disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk that your actions are a certain type or category of action. You have to disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk. So your question is, immediately, what makes a risk substantial and unjustifiable? A risk is substantial and unjustifiable when, based on the circumstances as known to the person at the time, is it a gross deviation of what an ordinary person, is a gross deviation of what a law-abiding person would do in the same situation. So not a normal deviation and not from an ordinary person or an average person, but from a law-abiding person, just any person who's following the law. Is it a gross deviation from the circumstances known to you at the time? That's the standard for reckless. Reckless intent is when a person consciously disregards a substantial and justifiable risk. But negligent intent is when they disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk that they should have been aware of. So if they didn't know the risk, that's not reckless, that's negligent. Now, what is substantial and unjustifiable risk for a negligent standard of care? For a negligent state of mind, is the failure to perceive the risk substantial and unjustifiable based on the conduct and what was known to the person at the time. That's the question. So negligent drops the standard way down. Finally, the last level of intent, that's zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is, I don't care what your intent is. I don't care if you meant to do it or not. Most states, speeding, for example, is zero tolerance. If you're going faster, it doesn't matter if you have a good excuse. You're still going faster than the speed limit. Statutory, sometimes zero tolerance is called statutory. If you do something via statute, that if you do this, it must be illegal. Therefore, that's also a level of intent. So those are the 5 main levels of intent that you would have to prove for any particular case. And remember, you never have to prove motive. So if you ask me what was his motive in doing it, the answer is generally, I honestly just don't care. Like this, like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Also, put in the comments anything that I got wrong or anything you want to argue about, what you want to hear next in one of these videos. I think I'm going to try and move away from Tory Lanez if I can help it, unless we can get something about the sentencing, maybe something about sentencing. But who's the next topic we got to figure out? You guys let me know.